Ladies and gentlemen, special guests, welcome to our discussion of the 2010 British elections. Before the event begins, we wish to acknowledge the first Australians on whose land we meet and whose cultures, which are among the oldest continuing cultures in human history, we celebrate. It gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce to you our special guest for this evening. Nick Bryant is the BBC Sydney Correspondent. Before he began his post in Sydney, Nick was the BBC Washington Correspondent during the Clinton and Bush years, and South Asia Correspondent covering Afghanistan and Pakistan. Nick completed his undergraduate degree at Cambridge, holds a doctorate from Oxford, and has also spent time at MIT. He is the author of a book on President Kennedy and the civil rights movement called The Bystander, John F. Kennedy and the Struggle for Black Equality. Nick was also tasked with covering the 1997 Blair election for the BBC. Tonight, Nick has kindly agreed to moderate our discussion, bringing his unique experience and insight to the dynamics of this election as Britain goes to the polls in one of the closest election contests in recent history. The ANU International Relations Society is proud to be able to bring this event to you in conjunction with the College of Arts and Social Sciences. We believe events such as this are an integral part of the vibrant academic and social environment at the Australian National University, enabling students and members of the public unparalleled access and engagement with modern pioneers of thought. I now welcome Nick Bryant to begin discussion and to introduce our ANU panellists. Thank you, Nick.
That was a very kind introduction. It makes me sound far more intelligent than I really am. So thank you very much for that. And it's great to see such a big turnout here this evening. I hear there's a big turnout as well in Britain. The polling stations have just opened. I have that from a very authoritative source, my mum. She's running a polling station in Bristol in the West Country. It's a Labour stronghold, and she says she's never seen quite so many people turn up so early. No question about it, this campaign has energised the British people in a way that we haven't seen for many, many years. And the uncertainty about the outcome has certainly been an element of that. And also these amazing televised debates, this Britain entering the 20th century, not the 21st century, with these televised debates, which some complain have turned the campaign into a kind of Britain's Got Talent, with Nick Clegg cast in the role of Susan Boyle. But they have energised the campaign and created a great deal of interest. I mean, just before we start, I wonder how many people, a quick show of hands, how many people have watched one of the debates? So a lot of you have seen the debates. All three of them? Anybody? Yeah? A few, all three? How many people saw Bigotgate? The footage of Bigotgate? So you've all seen that. Okay, great stuff. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce my fellow panellists, all of whom are from ANU. You'll know them better than me. Ben Wellings, we've got in the middle, a Brit, who's now in Australia. Andrew Hughes, who's an expert on new media campaigning, all that kind of thing. And Prasanna Gai, who's benefited from 18 years, I think, living in Britain. So you've got much better sense of what's happening there than I do. I haven't lived there for 12 years. But I thought we'd kick off first of all. Ben, you've spoken and you've written about the leaderisation of this campaign and the presidential nature of it. We've seen that before with Blair to a certain extent, but this time we've seen it more so than ever.
Yeah, and I feel ambivalent about it in some senses because, on the one hand, I think it has invigorated the campaign. It's invigorated people's interest in politics at a moment when there was a real risk that they could be really turned off, given the expenses scandal and so on. And so that's good. I mean, turnouts have been down in recent years, as low as 59%, 62%. I mean, it's not edifying stuff. On the other hand, I think that they don't really fit into the British political system very well. A kind of a cabinet system where my concern is that people perhaps think that if they vote for the Liberal Democrats, they're somehow voting for Nick Clegg, when they're really voting for the person in their constituency who may have not a snowdrop's hope in hell of actually winning the seat. So there are problems, and I think your reference to Britain's Got Talent is right. I mean, that they're actually, I see Simon Cowell has come out, in favour of the Tories now, and this could be just as decisive as Gillian Duffy. I don't know, but there is this way of presenting people, as if this is a kind of a contest between just the leaders, and it's much more than that.
Andrew Hughes, we thought this was going to be the new media election. We thought everybody was going to be tweeting, everybody was going to be on Facebook, it was all going to be online, and yet an old medium has reasserted itself. This has been a television election.
It has indeed, and very much a very popular one at that, because the debates have really got people, as has been said, out of their seats and a lot more involved in the political process. 10 million people watching the first debate is massive numbers. They're big numbers, and it's probably a good thing to see. But now the parties have to switch back to something old when they sort of were told to move to something new. And all of a sudden it became important how you sounded and looked on TV. And not just the debates, of course. The biggest incident of the campaign happened on TV. So we saw this, I suppose, devolution, going back in time, as it were, to the use of television media as a way of getting across the message to the mass market, compared to new media, where we see that so big in Australia, America, and other democracies around the world. The use of Twitter, Facebook, blogs, journals. This is all, it's been buried. It's as though it didn't even exist.
Prasanna, one of the interesting things about this election, obviously, is it takes place against a backdrop not just of the expenses scandal and Tory MPs buying duck houses and all that kind of thing, but an economic convulsion that perhaps has made the idea of change harder to sell, because Brits aren't stupid. They know we're in all sorts of trouble fiscally, and they know that whoever becomes the Prime Minister is going to have a very hard job economically.
I think that's very true. I mean, I think the audience needs to get a sense of the scale of the problem that Britain has. A typical financial crisis is of the order of 30% of GDP in terms of the cost to the economy. That's a third of national income. And Britain's taken quite a beating as a result of this. And so the fiscal problems that Britain has will take the best part of a generation to solve, which is what my old boss Mervyn King was effectively implying by his comment.
He used to be the governor of the Bank of England.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And so the problems here are quite substantial. None of the parties really wants to be seen to be the first to out what they might do. So they're all taking a very cautious line about the nature of the fiscal consolidation and the spending cuts that they're going to have to deliver. And in order to get the UK back to pre-crisis levels, we're talking huge cuts.
So Britain might have talent, but it hasn't got any money.
Yeah.
And this is so whoever wins. I mean, this is going to be day one. I mean, this is the nightmare problem.
I mean, to be fair, it's Britain's not got any money is not quite right. It's the government that doesn't have any money. The British current account deficit is not as big as, say, Greece or so forth, so it's not in quite the same dire straits. But it's still a case where just to sort of keep standing and go back to pre-crisis levels, which is the level of comfort and living standards that the British are used to, or are now used to, the amount that needs to be done is quite spectacular, and nobody really wants to do it, and I think everyone knows that. So.
And the parties have done really well to not talk about the economy, really. I mean, I know Brown has, this is really Brown's strong suite, that don't change now. Things are just recovering, and then he'll point to his record as Chancellor under Blair. But it should have been much bigger than it actually was, and in some senses, Biggotgate and so on may well have taken airspace and airtime away from that particular issue, and pushed the parties into explaining other things.
I think you're right about that, Ben. It's really moved into being an election about the leaders themselves. It's moved away from the issues which are really important to how Britain's going to be in the next 5 years, to going back to about, okay, well, who represents what? How good are they at campaigning? And that seems to be more the criteria for evaluation and deciding your vote than perhaps economic performance or smart policies which will change Britain for being a better society in the future.
It would be interesting to find out in the wake of this, how much people's vote was influenced not by the policies or even the leader, but like what Brown's hair looked like, on the last debate, or did Clegg stand in a funny way?
I've seen some early figures on that, and the persuasiveness of communication methods. We talked about it just before about new media, and it's new media's down the bottom. What did it were the leadership debates. So as high as 70% influence on Lib Democrat voters is that's a high number in persuading those people to move across to the party. So obviously they've used the debates as a way of information gathering and also evaluating the party based on the leader, and that's perhaps something we haven't seen that much of in the UK until now.
I mean, leaderisation has been very convenient for the three parties. They've been able to use that as a foil and hide away from confronting the real problems that, the real policy issues that have to be debated. And it's been very convenient.
But the triviality of election campaigns, I mean, that's a global phenomenon, isn't it? I mean, Gillian Duffy, the woman who was in Bigotgate, I mean, her American equivalent was Joe the Plumber and things like this, so we've seen characters like that, and the media love them. I mean, we always say we're going to cover this election differently, we're going to analyse every issue, we're going to fact check all the, and we never do. We just love the theatre of it, we love the pantomime. And so do the punters. I mean, that's it feeds each other.
I mean, people, it's a bit like watching a car race. Everyone watches a car race for the first couple of minutes to wait for the cars to bang into each other, and that's what it became. Is we're all waiting and hoping to see, the moment Brown's political career goes down the toilet, replayed on YouTube 100 times over, and the number of views for that happening on YouTube for Bigotgate. And not to mention, I think the more critical moment was afterwards in the BBC studios, where you could just see his reaction. He had not heard it before, I don't think. It was quite clear that his reaction was a man.
His head in his hand.
And then you could tell there was no one near him because he didn't have any advisors close by to say, look, quick, he leaned back. And then he put his head down and the microphone is in front of him. So it looked like he was hiding. And I'm thinking, oh no, it's going from bad to worse.
But might this not suggest, though, that the new media has an amplifying role? Like, it all happens on TV, but we wouldn't have seen Bigotgate or that image so much. I mean, I certainly looked at it on the internet, and I'm in Australia, and it's not, I have to. But, that may be then amplifying. I know it's low down there, but it might be having that effect. But, I mean, the other thing I wanted to say, though, about the leaderisation is that it actually masks problems for political parties. And I think if you look at Cameron here, I mean, and I'll leave the stuff to Andrew about Cameron standing in front of beer and other common things like workers, right? Is that he hasn't convinced the electorate that his party has changed. They might sort of say, well, here's a group of people from West London, have changed, but the party is still the same old party.
I want to talk about Cameron in a moment. Just stay with this new media thing for one sec. I mean, one thought that I had is that although it has been a televised election and a television election, new media has given people a great sense of empowerment now. So when they watch the TV, they feel, I can respond to that, and I can do something about it. And the whole sort of the tools of new media and all that kind of online chatter and the blogosphere, I mean, they've all increased this sense, I think, which we're seeing this morning with these high turnout figures, that actually, I'm part of this, I can change it. And it's engaged people at a new media level that actually now they'll go to the polling station and do the traditional thing. And we don't have compulsory voting in Britain, by the way. I should have explained it. You probably know that already.
That's the interesting thing of the political process. We're now using new media as a way of information gathering. We don't trust the political parties and what they say. We prefer to use media to interact the way we want. So we search out the information the way we want to, which is, I suppose, a lot different to in the past, where we'd sit there and wait for the campaign time and sit there and go, okay, now we've got 4 weeks of gathering information about who's doing what and what policies they're doing. And now, because I suppose maybe it's a sign of what they call a permanent campaign, where you don't stop campaigning even when you win or lose, you go back into campaign mode almost straight away and work with the market on new policies. And maybe that's a sign of that, but people are using the internet to gather information, to look at perhaps the sound bites which come out. You can look at the number of views on YouTube, you hit the stats figure for when these videos are uploaded and the number of views, and you can just see it goes viral so quickly. And it's reaching markets perhaps which TV can't, which is the more splintering of segmentation we're seeing in the modern market anyway, which makes it very, very hard for the major parties to target, the market itself, because people are so splintered in their views, and in such small segments, they're getting harder and harder to track down. So, perhaps the new media is being used by us to look at, the sound bites, the mistakes, the gaffes, the errors.
But how reliable is that, though? I mean, because the thing about new media is it gives people a chance to contribute without mediating themselves first.
Yeah.
I think we've all been in a situation where you get an email at work or something, and you think, that's ridiculous. And you think, you type off this sort of expletive, and you think, no, maybe I shouldn't send that. But I think on blogs, people don't do that, do they?
And it's very populist as well, Ben. I think a lot of people hop online and they wait to see who said something before them. And then they track those comments, and you can really see the theme coming. And it's, in a way, we're too scared to go out there and say, well, look, person A ahead of me in the line was an absolute idiot. He shouldn't have said that at all.
Yeah.
And we've become perhaps a little bit more populist because we're too scared to get out there online and say something. Because someone can click on our profile and send us a message and saying, look, you're an absolute idiot. Where did that come from?
That happens to me quite a lot.
But you can... Me too. Yeah. So you can track these things happening. And I think things like Twitter, for instance, 160 characters, what can go wrong at 160 characters? So politicians love it for that reason. They can say, I'm engaging with the market. You guys can contact me, your way and get directly through to me without all the media advisors around. But how would you know who's doing the Twitter feeds? You have no idea who's doing the feed of a politician. Yeah. You hope it's the person. But now and again, I'm sure the media advisor hops on with the password and replies. And who would know? I mean, that's the point, isn't it? That's where new media perhaps can't be trusted.
Well, talking of empowerment and talking of instant feedback, we're very keen to get your questions and comments throughout this. So get your questions ready. Let's talk about David Cameron. A year ago, David Cameron was 20 points ahead in the polls. He was a shoo-in. Nobody thought this election was going to be anything but a Tory victory, a clear-cut Tory victory with an overall majority. And yet he's failed to seal the deal. Prasanna, why do you think that is?
Two things really. One is he really hasn't been able to deliver a very clear message, I don't think. Typically, you would expect a nice change message to be coming across by now. He's had plenty of time to rehearse his lines, and he really hasn't been able to come up with a very clear, decisive story about how he's going to get a clearly ailing Britain onto the right foot. And I think that's told against him. At the same time, I think the public is not stupid. They also realise that a lot of the problems that Britain faces is a consequence of things external to the UK. And so they're genuinely torn about, well, here's someone who's obviously got a reasonable pedigree for economic management, Gordon Brown, versus someone who hasn't given us a clear change message and a clear sort of decisive, if you compare him with Thatcher in '79, when there was a winter of discontent and a very clear sort of Tory line, if you like, there isn't a clear line. And so this has allowed for the rise of Nick Clegg in a way, because people are looking for something else. And by trying to sort of enter the middle ground, he's ended up sort of obfuscating his own position, I think. So
Ben, is there a posh boy element to this? The old Etonian struggling to connect with the masses?
Well, that's what I was referring to earlier on, when he's photographed in front of London Pride, which is one of my favourite beers. But that's
very good beer, absolutely right.
But it turns out, of course, the director of Fuller's, which is the brewery, is supporting his national insurance campaign, which is one of the early things in the campaign that's sort of totally disappeared now under the TV debates and so on. But I think there is an element that he has to downplay his own background. He's an Etonian, or an old Etonian, and he has been to Oxford, which is no disservice to any of the people sitting near me, but it's not their fault, I assume.
Ever since they let Tony Avedon, I think.
But this, how does this play out? Well, for some people, it would be terrific. Good education. There we go. Should rule or govern in some sense, and for other people, it would just create a distance. In particular, if you're courting the centre vote. But it's quite interesting. I mean, who is Cameron courting? I mean, one of the key constituencies that they went after was the female vote, and they haven't really made any inroads there, I don't think. not sure why, but they haven't. And you know, and chasing disillusioned Labour voters was always going to be hard for them in constituencies like Rochdale, that they should now rename after Gillian Duffy, because that's how we all know it. But you know, so there is that image problem. There is still a class. I mean, you know, some people were writing, you know, in the commentary on this, that class is still that big issue, and it crops up in education. But that is one of the areas in which the Conservatives have managed to sort of successfully be quiet. I mean, they've had a very quiet campaign, really. They haven't talked about education, Europe. They've tried to skirt away from immigration, the economy as much as possible. So it hasn't come out quite as much, but he does need common objects behind him in photo opportunities.
I mean, the Tories are very sensitive about this. There's this famous photograph of David Cameron at university. He was a member of a very exclusive dining society called the Bullingdon Club. You've probably seen the photo of him. He's dressed in sort of white tie, ludicrous outfit, and these guys would just go around Oxford sort of trashing restaurants and, you know, doing terrible things. They bought the copyright of that photo so the press could not use it. I'm delighted to say the BBC actually did a painting of the photograph, so we can still keep using it. But anyway, so they are very sensitive about that. Andrew, over to you. I mean, what is it about Cameron? Why this inability? So, I mean, everything's going for him. I mean, the economy's in the doldrums, Britain's in a sense of malaise. I mean, it's crying out for a new leader, you would have thought.
Yep, they are. The market wants a new leader, for sure. Absolutely, you're right. And I think, to touch on what Ben said, the reason why he's not connected with the market, because someone else has. They've come in, Cameron and Brown both underestimated the power of the media and how powerful it was going to be, particularly those debates. I think they probably just thought, like what we're seeing now from Australia and America, where people just don't care. They struggle to get prime time footing. So,
although Cameron did start running into trouble before the debates, I mean, that lead started evaporating before the campaign had begun.
But it's interesting to see, though, how Cleggs compared himself with in the past, and Blair, I thought, wow, that's an interesting one to pull, you know, compare yourself against and say, look, I'm very similar to him. So perhaps he read the market better than what Cameron has, which is, I think the market's not ready for hard Conservative yet, but that's the only choice offered in the market. They'll go for it. But all of a sudden, we've got a third alternative before there wasn't. And that's changed everything. And that's why we've seen the momentum shift across to the Lib Dems very quickly, because people were going, look, the Conservatives aren't really doing it for us either, and nor are Labor. We want someone else. When are you both going to listen? This is what we want. We want something different. We want a new Britain, and either you give it to us or we give our vote to someone else.
But presumably you think that Cameron has been successful in rebranding the Tories, that was
sure.
an exercise, you know, detoxifying the brand, all that kind of thing.
Trying to go soft as well, the soft part of his image, very Kevin Rudd-like, you know, very simple message, hi, I'm Kevin. He has come out and said, hi, I'm David, you know, but doesn't have the same ring to it, I don't think, and it doesn't have the same appeal to the market. But he's trying to go for the simple image and connect with the market in a very simple way, because he's got to get that involvement happening.
Well, I think that he's done that, but he hasn't detoxified the party image. I mean, I think that's the problem. I mean, there's a couple of things to say. We might not want to be too hard on Dave, because he was actually starting from quite far back. I mean, Labour still had a 63-seat majority when, you know, Parliament went into recess, and that's a big majority to overturn. Where they have done badly is that their poll has, you know, their ratings have just been eroded, and I think that they've had a bad campaign. But he just hasn't been successful in convincing the electorate that the party has changed. I'll come back to this point. You know, he's made all those right sounds and moves, but people still think that the grassroots party is out of touch, and they might be right.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I think they have to be careful with, is if we've seen an example in a few places now where if you lose touch with the core will turn against you too. You can't take any more, you know, the core seats for granted. One lesson of politics in 2010, core seats are not to be considered easy seats to win.
And the problem at the moment in Britain for the Tories is that the disgruntled core has somewhere to go, and it's into the hands of parties like the British National Party, the Far Right Party, the UKIP, which is wants to take Britain out of the European Union. And
you always track to see where the leaders are going, to see where they think the battlegrounds are going to be in the election coming up. And Cameron spent a lot of time in marginal seats where he thinks the contest will be between the Conservatives and the Lib Dems. He hasn't been spending a lot of time in the marginals where it's between Labor and the Conservatives. He's not so worried there, because I think he knows he's got Labor there. But he's more fearful of the Lib Dems in those marginals, because I think he probably thinks, well, these guys are so similar to us, and this is where the momentum is. We need to get that back to us, because the momentum was with them. It really was. For a long time they had it.
Yeah, there was an important change of tactics about week 2 of the after the first leaders' election debate. Where he just recorded a whole new party political broadcast in his back garden, which attacked the Lib Dems, because it was suddenly aware that this actually is a problem.
Yeah, and that's where Labor got it wrong. First debate, Gordon Brown 7 times, I agree with Nick. I would have said, I agree with your career now ending. So. I mean, that's
nothing wrong with agreeing with Nick.
Yeah, but I mean, like the endorsement.
You can also get T-shirts made now. Actually, I agree with Nick. T-shirts are selling like hotcakes. Just going back to this class thing, Prasanna, you've lived in Britain for the last 18 years, pretty much. You've seen how Britain's changed. John Major, the last Tory Prime Minister, spoke of a class of society. He personified it. I mean, he had a very humble background. Blair, in my opinion, made Britain less class obsessed. It struck me that class hasn't been as big an issue as the Tories feared it would be.
I think that's right. I mean, I don't think over the last 10 or 20 years class has really mattered a great deal. Even if you look at the upper echelons of the civil service, for example, the people who are now the Humphrey Applebys of Britain are no longer graduates of Eton, and that's pervading everywhere in British society. So even though you do see people from privileged backgrounds coming through, it doesn't bother people as much as, do you have talent, to use your earlier example. So Britain has changed, and I don't think, and in a way this is why the Tories have kind of played this slightly incorrectly in my view, because they've worried too much about the posh background of David Cameron and George Osborne. Because really what people want is a clear narrative, a clear story. Just sort of, I don't think Cameron and Boris Johnson was what the Duke of Wellington had in mind when he coined his phrase about the Battle of Waterloo being won on the playing fields of Eton. I mean, these aren't the sort of people he was thinking of. What they want is, I think Britain has changed quite substantially. They want substance, and that's why Gordon Brown has been an attractive character. Ken Clarke, the former Chancellor, has been. They're seen as very credible people, and so I think there's a reason for that. It's moved beyond labelling.
Let's talk about Nick Clegg and the Clegg phenomenon, which was remarkable. I mean, Ben, just give us a sense of how dramatic that change was.
Well, I mean, those students who were in my course, and I was blogging them from England when I was stuck there, the ash cloud. But I was saying the first week of the campaign, I'm sorry to come back to it. I was saying the real contest was who's going to win Britain's Got Talent. Is it the potato-eating parrot, or someone singing White Cliffs of Dover who's 8, or something. And then the TV debates came along, and it really just changed. And that he sort of, I wouldn't say they come out of nowhere, because the Lib Dems do quite well at local elections. We should remember there are local elections happening at the same time. And they've got that sort of reputation of being able to sort your bins out and do all this kind of stuff. But in terms of a viable third political party, they will be pushing over this 25% of the vote mark that they need to get. And it just had quite an impact, from before that debate till after it. Like in the engagement that people had, and I think that's a good thing. I think that created that atmosphere for engagement. There was always this worry, though, that it was just something of a protest poll, and even very early on, the people who were being polled were saying, yes, I like Clegg, I'll vote for him. Yes, I think it's a bubble, it won't last. Right, and so I wasn't quite sure what they were saying there. They just wanted to give the two main parties a sort of a kick in the seat of the pants, or what. But we have to look at how difficult it is for the Liberal Democrats to translate support into votes, and that is precisely their point about the electoral system.
Prasanna, one of the things that struck me about the televised debate was that the response was slightly exaggerated in a way. And it reminded me, it seemed to tap in, Brits are notoriously sort of buttoned down, and for the last 15 years we've kind of been finding our emotions and all this kind of stuff, and it began with Diana, and then it went on with other things. You know, we react very badly to England being knocked out of the World Cup now as a nation. We go into this kind of national convulsion. We react with great joy when we beat you in the Ashes. We just go way over the top. You know, we have open-top bus rides through the centre of London that millions of people turn up to watch. You know, we have quite exaggerated responses in Britain to certain things, and this struck me as another example of that.
I think that's probably right. I mean, it's really hard to. I think it's become a leaderification issue, and you know, people have absorbed the TV debate. They've sort of suddenly, as you say, catapulted themselves into the 21st or 20th century, and now it's they've overshot. Now the question is whether by the time of the polling day, they will have realised that actually things are much more serious, and therefore let's change our voting patterns. And whilst I'd love to support that nice man Nick Clegg, Lib Dem policies are a little bit uncertain, so therefore maybe I'll just stick to what I know, the devil I know, and vote according to my type, whatever that may be. And I think, and that's a big unknown. You know, how much emotive response has that, you know, exaggerated TV performances?
Well, let's get into that.
Yeah.
Just a moment. I mean, was this just a sugar high and the effects have worn off now?
Big question, isn't it? And I think, look, it remains to be seen. But you know, going back to what I said before, populist. You know, once we knew there was a momentum hyping, we all want to be associated with someone who's a winner. You know, a lot of us, you know, identify with winners, and that's not a bad thing, right? That's a good thing. And so once he came across as being this guy who was on a roll, he started to pick up a lot of momentum behind him. And look, people aren't that involved in politics anymore to read the press, to go onto websites, read analysis and go, well, maybe it's an overnight sensation. They don't care that to that level. They're watching the TV debates going, well, this guy looks pretty good. And then they switch off again the next week, switch back on again, there he is doing well. Come to week, you know, debate 3, he's doing still quite well. I like this guy more and more. And they're probably thinking, well, when it comes to politicians, really, who is going to be long-lasting in this game?
And
who has a long record? So maybe a sugar high is not a bad thing either.
And these kind of things are impressionistic. I mean, they always cite the Kennedy-Nixon debate in 60. Kennedy didn't lay a knockout punch on Nixon. It was all about impression. It was all about the sight of this good-looking, very tan guy who had applied makeup, even though he tricked Nixon thinking he hadn't. So Nixon didn't. Nixon was covered in flop sweat, he had a gammy knee, he knocked it on the car on the way to the debate. All those things. I mean, it was all impressionistic rather than... And that's what we've seen in these debates here.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a play phenomenon.
Yeah, and it's just momentum. And then he went out into grassroots stuff as well after the debates. I love that because it really enriched out to people who are maybe a little bit undecided. But he campaigned like he was a winner, like he'd already won the election. And people love seeing someone with confidence. No doubt about it at all. Compared to Gordon Brown, a man who's under pressure, he's under a lot of not just pressure from the electorate, but also within his own party. There's been a lot of talk of challenge even before the election of people coming up against him in the party room. So he's getting pressure from two fronts, and he shows it too. He doesn't campaign like the winner. He doesn't come across and say, I'm the leader, I'm the Prime Minister. Hang on, I'm the Prime Minister. And he doesn't do that all that well.
But Nick Clegg kind of overshot a little bit because, certainly if past British elections have anything to go by, you had Neil Kinnock, who was famously trumpeting his victory before the event and came unstuck as a result. And Nick Clegg was very quickly slapped down, I saw, after he overreached himself and started talking about Gordon Brown possibly not being.
But he had to keep those people who'd made the decision to come across. He had to trap them, and he had to say to them, "Look, there is a reason why you've made your decision to come across to me, and that is because I am a viable alternative to the other two parties." And he never ever look. I didn't hear it all that much from him until maybe the last week or so, where he's talked about power sharing and the role they will play at the end of the election when it comes time to bargain. For who's going to be the next Prime Minister.
Before we get into that, the bargaining that might take place, one thing, we're talking a lot about the campaign. There is a notion that campaigns make very little difference to how people actually vote. You know, that you basically decided by the time you're 16, because of, you know, where your parents vote or where you've grown up. You know, it's like supporting your football team, isn't it? You know, I've always supported Port Vale, you know, so I'll still keep turning up, and, you know, I'll still keep voting Labour. There's that. I mean, then the other thing about, you know, like how Britain has changed is that people have become less involved in politics, and they've also feel less empowered to make changes. So if you look in the last 50 years, party membership has declined enormously, actually really since the late 90s. Party membership has declined. Fewer people are involved across the social, and let's bring class back in here, you know, across all the different classes. On the other hand, more women are now involved in politics. It used to be a male preoccupation, you know, across different classes. Now it's a professional occupation of men and women. And I think that you know, it'd be interesting to see how this campaign, of all of them, because this is the most where I think the campaign is likely to make a difference, will have affected people's vote when they leave the polling booths today. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be interested to look at too and hear about where posters have been going up in people's front yards, because you know, it's voting's often a social cost to it, because you know, very, very rarely do you hear people come out and say, I'm voting for party X or person Y. Okay, we've only seen Obama was great like that. I loved how the campaign had that momentum again, where people going out going, yes, change is going to happen. Yeah. And yet he's become the first US president in history whose opinion rating is now below 50% after 12 months in office. So, you know, this is the danger too of over-promising to the market, because then if you under-deliver, they will punish you. There's no forgiveness anymore. Like, you know, people, you're right, maybe they're not that involved, but at the same time, if you're not delivering, the punishment will come. Yeah. You know, it will be there. And that's why I say there is no such thing anymore as marginal seats. Every seat can only be considered to be marginal, because if you treat the market like that, they will turn.
Do you think the Obama experience has impacted the British election in any way? I mean, in people trying to portray themselves as agents of change, actually people say, well, you're the most charismatic American president that we've had for 50 years. Yeah. And yet, as soon as he comes into office, he runs into all the problems, and change has been very hard to deliver. Yeah, and I noticed too the front page of the Sun newspaper this morning had David Cameron, you know, hope. With their Obama, like the Obama style. With the Obama poster, and I thought that was interesting how they're probably desperate for someone who is going to bring substantial change to not just the economy and Britain but also the political system, and maybe that's what we're all after, and then maybe that's what Clegg represents as well. Penny, you're going to wield the microphone very soon, hopefully. So get your questions ready. I just want to, before we go to the audience, I just want to talk about the guy that we haven't spoken about much, and he's Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister. Possibly not for much longer. But I wonder what your view is on what's the problem with this guy. I mean, he's clearly a very talented politician, a very talented public administrator, whatever, a technocratic figure, but he's never managed to quite. There was a short honeymoon when he first came in, but he's never really managed to kind of make the connection.
Well, I mean, I think he'll be remembered as a good Chancellor and a bad Prime Minister, neither of which is totally correct. But I think that it might come back to the medium. It might be television. You know, he's not a comfortable person to speak with. He doesn't have a very relaxed manner when you're talking with him, and other politicians notably did and do. And I think that he might have been well suited to that Chancellor role, but perhaps less suited to the different demands of the role of the Prime Minister. Yeah, I agree with that. I think his personal brand, it doesn't appeal to that many markets, which you need to get nowadays, particularly the middle market. You need to get them to win government anywhere, basically. And he didn't do that. And I think too, he didn't even capture the core towards the end of the campaign. When Biggotgate happened, he should have come out and said, yeah, I called her a bigot. She was racist. And he should have said that, because to the core voters of Labor, they would have agreed with that. They would have gone, yeah, that's right. And he would have had a bit of a momentum swing back towards his vote. I mean, she hadn't said anything that was racist. Yeah. But, she expressed a concern about the number of Polish. But he should have led from the front and been more like a leader. That's what I think. He should have, yeah.
I mean, what's interesting about Gordon Brown is that in a way, certainly economically, he's actually quite old Labour. It's just that he's been, in the context of being a Chancellor of a new Labour government in the 90s, he was forced, if you like, or coerced into operating under more market discipline. And I think that his record shows that. The sort of the 90s Gordon Brown, the one that we all laud as a great chancellor, was someone who was constrained. And his true instincts are very much all Labour in a way. You see that in his inability to connect in the modern sort of debates and so forth.
I think more in the way he nationalised, Northern Rock, but and the fact that the reason I say that he wasn't necessarily a great chancellor is I think some of his policies contributed to the financial crisis. So somehow he managed to get away with it.
Changes in the way the city was regulated. Let's go to the audience. I wonder whether you, sir, right in the middle. Oh, just down here. Just down here.
Firstly, thanks for your time, everyone. I just wanted to ask that, given the strong possibility of a hung parliament after this election, what's the chances for electoral reform in Britain, and if so, how that changed British politics in terms of which party stands to lose the most from that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I was planning to get to, but let's get there now.
Well, I can tell you on Monday, so maybe the other two.
The possibility of a hung parliament, I mean, it's obviously very big.
Yeah, I'd say it's likely to happen. It's probable. No, it will happen.
Will happen, yeah.
Whether the key number for the Lib Dems is 100. Whether they get there or not is the big question. I don't think they will. I think that maybe 80 is something probably more realistic, because the Conservatives have campaigned very hard on the marginals, where the Lib Dems were hoping to pick up. So, and I think that's happened the last couple of weeks of the campaign. We've seen a lot of hard work done by the Conservatives in the marginals, who identified the Lib Dems as being the biggest risk to them taking those seats. So, hung parliament, I'd say yes, for sure. To what extent they'll play a role as being the kingmaker for the next government, wow, that's a big one. Because I think that's something they've probably haven't considered until now, because the campaign, when you're working on a campaign, it just goes so quick. And I think that's something they've been trapped up in, is the whole momentum, the happy feelings, the happy vibes about doing so well. And now they've come on the question, wow, we could actually influence government. We could even be offered seats in government. What do we do? I mean, and that's really going to decide whether they'll be part of the government for the future, or whether they'll sit back and let it all unfold. Because, as Prasanna said, I think about the economy, it's the greatest unknown. Whoever takes over a basket case economy. Maybe not that bad, but it's got to be a lot of cuts ahead to things like welfare. I've already read online today about they're discussing the senior levels of the public service in Britain freezing welfare payments for the next 12 months. Now you can imagine what's going to happen when that comes through. Who would like to be Prime Minister then? So yeah.
Ben, you copped out. I mean, give us some plausible scenarios and some possible kind of how some deals might be cut.
It would be really interesting, because let's assume that the Conservatives are the largest party but without an overall majority, or one that's not workable. So then you've got the Liberal Democrats, or the Labour Party that need the Liberal Democrats and vice versa to govern. The price of which may be a whole variety of different policies, but the key one would be electoral reform. Now, the Lib Dems didn't say too much about this, kind of to my surprise, at the last election, and obviously they're not saying too much this time round, because you don't want to kind of have your cards on the table before the bargaining starts. But I think that what might happen is that you get some sort of very unstable government that is liable to critiques from the largest party in Parliament, that they don't really have an actual mandate. And then, Nick Clegg is sort of saying things like, well, he won't work with Gordon Brown. Well, how can he dictate to the Labour Party about who should be their leader? I mean, this is quite a difficult situation. So the bargaining will be intense. Then let's just assume that something happens, and before that government collapses, some legislation is enacted that it does allow for a referendum on electoral reform, which is carried successfully. So you can see we're getting a bit, further away here. But then, I think that it would be in the Labour Party's, it'd certainly be in the Liberal Democrats' interests. They might start to get the sort of proportion of seats that is relative to their number of votes. It's probably in Labour's mid-term interests. partly because I'm also be interested in what happens if you get a Conservative government in London and an SNP government in Scotland with a referendum on Scottish independence in the offing. Am I losing you in all the permutations here? But anyway, I think it might just be in everyone's best interest eventually to have a proportional system. The Conservatives eventually will do much better in England than they will in other parts of the country. So. You
said Nick Clegg couldn't demand of the Labour Party that they change their leader, but Prasanna, as you know, if Nick Clegg said that, there are a lot of people in the Labour Party that would be joyous.
Yeah, absolutely.
They'd love to see the back of Bryant.
Absolutely. I mean, I suspect you'll get some kind of horse trading. If I was either a Tory or a Labour Party person, I wouldn't want. I'd be desperately trying to get proportional representation kicked into touch. You try and convince people that it would be something to deal with later. There are bigger issues on the front foot, and you would offer Gordon Brown as a sacrificial lamb to sort of keep the sort of the peace and in the short term, because I think neither major party would really want to allow a third player in. So it's not going to be in their interest either way, whoever wins, to really sort of play ball with proportional representation. Great idea,
but one of the possible scenarios is that the Prime Minister next week or 2 weeks' time will be somebody who didn't appear in the televised debates, who hasn't campaigned as the leader of their party.
Yeah, it's a serious issue, and I think it'll be a recipe for an unstable coalition, I think. And so you're probably going to see a second election, not in the not too distant future.
Really, you think we're right?
Yeah, I think so.
Not good for the economy, not good for business. That period of uncertainty. Yes. Sorry.
I've got two questions, if you don't mind, which, in my opinion, are related. The first one is to do with immigration. To what extent do you think that immigration will have an impact on voting patterns, particularly as Londonians being unfortunately managed to understand? I think that's unfair, but that might be the reality back in London. And the other issue is to do with the white van man. How is that man in the white van going to vote this time around?
White van man and how immigration has impacted the campaign, Ben?
I think immigration again has not been spoken about, partly because the Conservative Party don't want to remind people that they have this image as the nasty party. On the other hand, of course, Bigotgate propelled that issue. I think the Conservative, I think Nick Clegg was right when he'd said that, I agree with Nick, that trying to cap non-EU immigration is not going to address the concerns of people like Gillian Duffy, who were worried precisely about it's not even immigration, it's just free movement of labour from one part of the European Union into another. I don't know how that's going to affect voters, whether it will depress the Labour vote in some of those key northern constituencies, but on the other hand they're fairly safe Labour seats, notwithstanding what you're saying, and so they might have to depress the vote quite far, or to have an impact on Labour's electoral fortunes there. London, you'd have to look at the Bethnal Green and Bow electorate, whether George Galloway gets back in for the Respect Party, but London is, I think, actually relatively comfortable with its multiculturalism. I don't think it's quite the same as Bradford, Burnley and Oldham.
I mean, I do think the tide is turning against immigration. I remember in the early part of 2000 when you go into a bank and every teller was called Magda, because they're all from Poland. And the economy was booming and nobody minded at all that there were a whole heap of Polish tellers working in Barclays Bank. Now, of course, that's changed. And over the last few years, you've seen even the respectable intellectual classes now talking about immigration and dealing with immigration. And I think there's a sort of consensus emerging for an Australian-style system, points-based or what have you. And I think it's a case that when the economy was booming, there were skill shortages. Therefore, they wanted anyone they could get. Now, of course, the situation is soured, and therefore they want to turn the tap off, and they probably will. I think that's just the reality. And even in London, even though it's a much more cosmopolitan city, I think there's a sort of disconnect, because most people who live in London would like to sort of view it as a global city, and I think the whole marketing of the City of London is all about London as a global financial centre. And so there's a sort of problem that the politicians have. They want, at one level, for London to be that global place, and to be a Londonistan, if you like. But at the same time, people in London are beginning to notice and beginning to sort of raise these issues. So I think you'll see a drawback, but that's a natural consequence, I think, of the boom and bust of the UK economy.
Andrew, one time that immigration did feature in this campaign very prominently was when both the other leaders wanted to take down Nick Clegg in the second debate. They obviously went there with a very different strategy. The I agree with Nick thing was out the window. They were going to nail him. And the thing they tried to nail him on was the amnesty that the Liberal Democrats had promised people who'd been in the country 10 years, illegal immigrants, they were giving them a chance of citizenship. So it showed that they still think immigration can press certain buttons.
Yeah, because it is a wedge issue. Because it's the one issue where everyone's got a view and opinion on, which is quite strong. And that's the point, I suppose, is that if I ask you your view and opinion on immigration, it comes out straight away. And we know that. We know through research that people are very opinionated on immigration. You either go one way or the other. Either you're for it or against it. It's not a maybe issue. For most people, it's not a maybe category, and that's what they use it for, because they want to have it come out as, well, look, he's quite weak on this policy. That's what they use it for, because it's an emotive issue as well. It's for most people, a very personal issue. Either they can relate to someone who's moved to the country and made a success of their life, and so they're usually for it, or they see, perhaps in some of the areas where Ben was talking about, where they have a fear of losing their job to the cheap paid bank teller called Magda, and their fear is then, well, what happens to my job? My job's under threat because I don't have the skills, or I can't offer myself that cheap. And so you play on that fear in someone to hopefully keep them with the same, their decision, the same party. You don't want them to switch across. On you want them to say, well, there's a risk here. Can you afford to take that risk? And that's how they use immigration quite well in campaigns.
Excuse me, hence my asking, how does the man in the white van, how is he going to vote?
White van man.
White van man? Don't know.
White van man is very much in play, I think, isn't it? And that's why this election is so hard to call.
Yeah.
We've got a question midway, sir.
We're in the age of electronic messaging, which you mentioned before, and on the television, yesterday evening, I saw quite a few people working for the parties door knocking and dropping leaflets in letterboxes. Does that suggest that the party machines don't trust the electronic media to actually carry the message for them? And also, I'd like to ask, do you think that Brown perhaps is handicapped, having come from under the shadow of Blair and being part of the war cabinet that sent the troops into Iraq, and subsequently is mistrusted as a result?
The door knocking first.
It's a really good question. I think the last week of the campaign they've identified this is such a close one. They need to get their people out there. Face-to-face contact is so much more effective than the internet. It really is. In this day and age of electronic media, face-to-face contact is the thing we actually will influence us the most. It's a personal selling approach, you might call it. But it's quite powerful. If you have a candidate turn up to your door and knock on your door, guess what? Now there's a chance you can ask them 50 questions, and you can get them. And more often than not, they're not there with a backup force. They're there usually by themselves because they're told by the party machine, no, you should be strong enough to get out there and handle someone who opens the front door to you. If you're not, what are you our candidate for? So I think it's been quite an effective tool as well, because it gets that personal relationship between the party and the voter, because it can be lost in this day and age where we've moved to mass media, to management of the brand, management of the message, where you see a Prime Minister now, even in this country, surrounded by 5-6 media advisors at any one time, and it's easier to get to them than it is to him, and in a way they have more power on him anyway. So in terms of why they're doing it, absolutely trying to make the connection. They're also worried. I suppose their internal polling will be indicating this is going to be a very close race where every vote's going to count. We have to get out there. The other thing too is convincing people to turn up and vote. Great you support the party, but can you please get down to the polling booth and actually cast a vote? It's not good enough. We don't want you in the lounge room. We want you out, turning up and placing the vote.
One thing the internet can't do is drive you to the polling station.
Exactly right. Yeah, and that's been part of the grassroots of campaigning, is getting the party machine organised to arrange lifts down to the polling place. have the scones and jam and cup of tea already if it's a cold day, and making people feel right at home. Hey, aren't we nice after all? We're not just these faceless machine where people with a heart and care at the local issues you do. And sometimes the most influential person in a campaign is not the leaders. It's that person who hops in the car and drives that person down to the polling place. So,
on the second part of the question, the impact of Iraq, my suspicion is actually Afghanistan has been a bigger foreign policy issue. But
because it currently is. I mean, Iraq was an issue in 2005, but it didn't damage Labour so much.
That's the one.
So I think that he, Brown spoke at the Chilcot inquiry, which was earlier this year. I think it probably has had some impact, and he has been a bit vulnerable to attacks about not supporting the troops in Afghanistan materially enough, or with materiel. But again, foreign policy doesn't usually register as a voter concern.
More questions? Yes, at the back there.
Sorry, it's a simple question. I'm just wondering why nobody seems to be very interested in talking about Europe.
Europe, because again, most voters aren't interested in it. It wraps parties up in knots. It completely splits parties. We've seen that twice. On the other hand, most voters won't understand it unless it's about people from Eastern Europe coming to Britain.
Europe's a bit of a third rail, isn't it, in British politics now? Nobody wants to touch it.
No one wants to. Yeah, right. It's very important for parties, less important for electorates.
I think it's also important to realise that Europe is currently in a mess because of the Greek situation, and in a way, the big strength of the British economy is the fact that it's outside Europe at the moment. So the fact that there is a glimmer of hope for the UK economy going forward is largely as a consequence of being outside the European Monetary Union. So because it gives them an extra degree of flexibility. So it's not something that they particularly want to get into as a debate. So except in, as you say, from an immigration perspective or so forth. So.
Questions at the back? Yes.
I guess my question's more to Andrew from a marketing perspective. Holly Toynbee from The Guardian this morning spoke really of Labor's kind of decision to back off the attention on Brown and really hammer home this "come home to Labor" slogan.
Yep.
Is that a questionable last-minute rebranding attempt, or is it a great appeal to the party faithful?
I think it was more an issue, Gus, of them saying, okay, look, we now identify that Brown is making the connection we want it to between the party and the voter, so the consumer and the brand, as it were. And now they're saying, okay, well, look, we've got to get this vote back. We've got to convince people who are not thinking about voting for the party this time round. As Gillian Duffy, the famous person of Biggotgate, came out and said, I'm not voting for anyone, and yet she was Labor before all that happened. So, maybe she's typical of what the Labor heartland's thinking at the moment, is that they're so disappointed in their brand, in their service delivery performance, that they've gone, right, well, why turn up? What's the reason? And so they've come out now and said, look, well, forget the leader. It's the party itself you should be more concerned with. That's your connection after all. Is not with a person, it's with us, the party, the brand you love, the one you voted for since you're 6. On the terraces and all, it's that identification with the brand they're going after. They're saying, trying to go back to those old times of identification with the party and not the leader. And that's part of modern politics is, you identify with the party by the leader. But now they know it's not working. Their internal figures, again, probably saying that Brown is definitely on the nose. And seen by, I said this a couple of guys before, that look, there's no better sign than what the party thinks internally than who's coming out and supporting the leader of the party in the team itself, in the senior team. I haven't heard much from Alistair Darling, the Chancellor of Exchequer, coming and saying, Gordon Brown's such a great guy, vote for him. In fact, he's where is he? Where is he in the campaign? I haven't heard much of him. But yet he should be one of the people front and centre saying, look, you've got to vote for us. You've got to come out and vote, if not for the leader, but, for the party then. Because they have to stop what's going to happen. And they are going to lose a significant number of seats. So I think the identification at the last minute, they've tried to switch it across away from the leader and onto the party itself. They're saying, I heard just on the car on the way here, they're saying now that there's been a last minute pick-up of votes going across to Labor. Now, I'm not too sure how reliable that is, an online poll, but maybe it's got to work and save a couple of seats from going.
And it comes in a week when there have been confused messages from Labor about tactical voting as well. The number of senior Labor figures, Mandelson, Ed Balls, suggesting people vote tactically to keep the Lib Dems out and the Tories out. Should we have another question? Yes, madam. Oh. Sorry, let's have this one first. Have you got the microphone?
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation this evening. Do you think this will boil down to this situation similar to the US presidential election in 2000, where a third-party spoiler comes in and determines the outcome in a not very democratic fashion?
A third-party spoiler being Ralph Nader?
No, being the US Supreme Court.
Oh, right. we have got a Supreme Court in Britain now, but it won't weigh on this, will it, Ben?
No. I don't sort of see it as I mean, I think that the interesting thing about this election, how it's no longer become a two-party monopoly. So I'll be actually quite interested to see how the bargaining pans out.
Yeah, the mechanism is really interesting. They've been looking at the New Zealand model very closely. New Zealand's quite interesting because they call it freestyle bargaining. Bronze and silver can join together to beat gold. It doesn't happen, but it can. And also the worry about New Zealand is the first time they brought in PR in the 96 election. It took them over 6 weeks to form government. But anyway, so we could be into that kind of territory, which is very, very interesting. Yes, madam.
I hope this is not a trivial question, but in the British culture, the three wives, are they an influential factor?
Should have brought the three wives up earlier, absolutely. Samantha Cameron, Sarah Brown, and the big success has been Nick Clegg's wife, actually, who's Spanish.
Yeah, but was stuck in Spain. Couldn't get to in the early parts of the campaign because the Ash Club. I think that they helped sort of provide a nice domestic element of the party leaders, and if the party leaders are chasing the women vote, then I think they are quite useful. They're playing more and more of a role in the election the permanent campaigning that Andrew's been talking about. They are helpful, and I mean, I don't know what effect does sort of announcing you're going to have a fourth child have in an election campaign. Again, I'd like to see some figures, after the event to see if that's had any determining outcome. But they are an important part of the political accoutrement now.
Yeah, it was interesting to see just before the campaign started off too, where that I forget the name of the TV show, where Gordon Brown appeared and really laid his personal life bare. And talked a lot about, some of the issues would put a lot of strain on their marriage. And I thought, wow, that's really bringing in, his wife into the campaign, because the campaign had really kicked off. It was a Cold War campaign then, of course, without knowing the election date. But it was interesting to see that he really was trying to strike, I think, a more personal chord with the market and with the electorate, saying, look, I've gone through these issues. I'm a normal man. Just because I'm Prime Minister doesn't mean somehow my life is insulated from personal issues. And I think he was trying to make that connection. And it was interesting, even yesterday, someone attacked the use of his wife in the campaign, and he just came out so quickly and went quite hard. And he was very, very hard against it, saying, well, my wife is patron of a number of charities. She's allowed to come out and speak on issues which are close to her. And although she, throughout his term as Prime Minister, she has been, very quiet and a lot more behind the scenes than perhaps other political wives we've seen, such as Hillary Clinton. So,
one of the interesting things about the campaign has been that the woman who said, I will not campaign, I will go and do my day job, which was a very senior job, a very successful lawyer, was the woman who actually seemed to get the most respect from the electorate. Yeah. We're going to have to bring this to a close. So, one more at the back. Sorry, sir. Go on.
My question is on public services, more specifically the NHS. The Tories have said that they've confirmed to the electorate that they won't cut public services, but reality suggests, with the economic data out, that they would have to make some cuts. My question is, where exactly are these cuts going to be seen? Is it the NHS or other public services around the country?
Prasanna, where are the razor squads going to go to work?
I think everywhere is the short answer. I think if you look at what the three parties are doing, the Tories are trying to front-load the fiscal cuts. The Labour and Liberal Democrats are trying to spread it out. The sort of figures that I've seen suggest that the ratio for the Tories of spending cuts to tax rises by the end of this sort of political economic cycle is of the order of 4 to 1, whereas for Labour it's 2 to 1. So that's a sort of scale. And that requires pretty much, I don't think that's sustainable or credible. And so what you're going to see is tax rises instead of sweeping cuts, partly because if you have a coalition government or if you have certain governments, certain parties weighted to certain social platforms, and this is the if you like, the centrification of the Tory party and so forth, those cuts to things like the NHS are going to be very hard to sustain. So what you're going to see is higher taxes most likely in an effort to try and claw this back. And you'll see spending cuts happening in various places wherever they can kind of get away with, and this is where the coalition and the bargaining is going to matter, because it's not obvious where. It's just going to be wholesale cuts everywhere, but they're not going to target one particular sort of sacred cow, if you like.
To wrap this up, let's have some predictions. Andrew, who's going to win?
There will be no winner. I think, though, the Conservatives will win the most seats in the House, though. That's for sure. It will be a hung parliament. I'm tipping for the Lib Dems to go into power with them. I think they need to get
Lib Dems with the Tories.
Yep, for sure.
But the Lib Dem rank and file, they'd have problems with that.
Oh well, they'll get over it when they realise the credibility of
they're more radical than Labour.
Yeah,
arguably.
Yeah. So
and Europe policies, pro-European against the Eurosceptics, troublesome.
True, but comparison is if they have to go into power with Labor, what's the future there? Labor are definitely on the nose. They're in a rebuild phase as well, which means they have to burn down a lot of their existing policies and start from the ground up again, and particularly in the market back. How do you convince the market, look, so long in power, give us another chance 5 years from now? Oh no, we'll be better by then. Who's going to believe that? So I think, look, they're probably also thinking practical, not just policy. And practical is we've got to convince people there was a reason why they came across to us, that we can perform, we are a viable alternative to government. We can perform in government, in a ministry role. The only way you can do that is being in power. You can't do that from sitting on the fence or having the middle seats in the back of the House. So I think they need to get that credibility there. If they took on anything economic, death knell. It's too many, as Prasanna said, a lot of cuts can come everywhere. It makes you very unpopular who has got that job.
Right. So that's a good point. Ben, who's going to?
Well, I've predicted a lot of things before and during this campaign in the hope that one of them might be right. But in one sense, I think the British people will be the winner if some significant change. But what I think will happen, there'll be a Conservative majority, but a Lib Lab pact of some sort that should be very unstable, and then we'll have another election in a fortnight's time. In a few months' time.
All right. Well, who's going to be the Prime Minister at the end of the year then?
At the end of the year, before the election or after the election? After the next one.
Yeah.
Possibly David Miliband.
Somebody named Miliband.
Yeah, someone named Miliband.
His brother.
Yeah, not his dad.
I think his dad's dead.
I think so. Yeah.
Right. Prasanna?
I think I'm going to go for a minority Conservative government. They'll probably cobble something together with somebody like the Ulster Unionists. That's probably going to be unstable medium-term election in another year or so, and that'll be an interesting one because you'll have, as you say, someone like David Miliband running, possibly a sort of slightly, depending on how decimated the Labour Party gets, but I think that'll be the real election.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for your time. Ben Wellington, Prasanna Gai, Andrew Hughes, many thanks.
Fabulous discussion. We've had Susan Boyle, Polish immigrants and foreign affairs, and now we've got a prediction that's on tape, so we can at the end of the year and see who the winners are. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me once again in thanking our academics, Prasanna, Ben and Andrew. And please join me in thanking our BBC correspondent, the wonderful Nick Bryant. just like to also thank the College of Arts and Social Sciences here at the Australian National University and the International Relations Society, and also to our audience with their fabulous questions. So thank you very much for coming out tonight. Look forward to seeing the results as they come to hand probably tomorrow or in the next week or so. So thank you very much.